Good evening, everyone. The time has just gone 7:45, and we're going live at 8:00. And until then, we're going to have a little bit of a pre-show banter with some of our guests who are joining us this evening. So I see Gigi Alcock has joined us already, and Mkhulisi has joined us as well. So guys, turn on your cameras and let's find out what's happening in your lives, and check where you're joining us in the world from. Today is a freezing day in Johannesburg. If you're joining us from somewhere else. Gigi, where in the world are you?
Hi, how are you, Had?
You must be in Joburg if you dress that warmly.
I'm in Kyalami in Johannesburg, that's right.
And I see you have a Kazinomics jacket. I have the book next to me as always, because this is like my Bible. And I hope the people watching tonight have all read it. And we're certainly going to give it a punt this evening as well.
Can I ask some multiple choice questions?
Yeah, maybe you should. But tell us what's happening in the real economy out there.
Yeah, so no, things are actually going relatively well. I think we're going to talk about it later, but with the unrest, they were actually remarkably unscathed. And so in many ways, where the formal retailers aren't able to service that sector, the Spaza and Hawker sector and other sectors are filling that gap, as it were. So yeah, I was in Soweto this morning and everything was remarkably normal. So, the world makes a racket and life continues in the rest of the world.
Well, I'm on a webinar tomorrow night with the Australian Jewish community, and their webinar is called The Crisis of South African Jews. And it's going to start with, like, guys, I really appreciate the concern, but I just don't think we're in crisis.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, everyone's kind of moved on from that. And yeah, it was, I was almost slightly disappointed because, you kind of, you want to take some photos, so the only photos I've got were sent to me from people in the townships over the unrest. But yeah, as I said, remarkably normal and not much of a crisis.
So I see, in fact, Dorothy is saying to us that it's sizzling in Netanya. So please tell us how hot it is in Netanya where you are. We'd love to compare some notes because it is absolutely freezing in Johannesburg. Mkhulisi, a big welcome, Professor. Welcome to you too.
Thanks, Howard. I appreciate that.
Cool. Professor, let's get you unmuted and we'll touch base and find out where in the world you join us from. So, Ray, where are you at the moment?
So I'm in Durban.
Okay. Does it get that cold in Durban that you have to wear a jacket?
I think for people that have lived in Durban for a long time, it does. But I mean, I lived in Johannesburg for 10 years, so I don't think it's as cold as people make it out to be here. But yeah, it is quite cold at the moment.
Well, Gigi, you'll know that in Johannesburg, we say the same thing every single year. And we say, it's never been this cold in Johannesburg before.
I feel like it's definitely never been this cold in Johannesburg. Yeah.
Professor, where in the world do you join us from? You're up north.
I'm joining you from Polokwane in the heart of the city.
Ah, okay. And how are things in Polokwane at the moment?
It's freezing cold.
Terribly
cold.
It's terribly cold, I think, everywhere at the moment, except those people watching us from overseas. Dorothy Silver said it's sizzling in Netanya, where she's busy watching us from. But it's been an interesting week because we'll talk about it after we go live in 8:00, because this week we've kind of almost forgotten 2 weeks ago. I don't know if you get that sense, Ray, that what was top of mind 2 weeks ago and what seemed like a crisis 2 weeks ago, it's almost like the country moved on. And how do we do that so quickly?
Well, I think you kind of have to move on with life. I mean, I think it was obviously that I don't think anyone wants to see again. I think especially for us as millennials, I could probably categorize myself there. We didn't grow up in in apartheid South Africa, where there was unrest and instability. You all delivered a fantastic democratic dispensation for us, and this was very scary. But I think we also are a very resilient people. I think people, especially here, from what I saw, kind of got up the next day and said, we need to rebuild. We need to move on. There are livelihoods involved. There are jobs involved. And we have to all pull together. And I think for the majority of the part, that's what happened. So, but you're right. It is quite scary to think 2 weeks ago, we were living what I would describe as a horror movie, really.
So in what part of Durban are you?
Mhlanga.
In Umhlanga. So I have people who were in the area and they'd say they would go to bed at night and they could hear gunshots going off. Could you hear that from where you were in Umhlanga? Or could you just hear the rustling of the waves close by?
I think a bit of both, which is quite scary to say that. But I think in places like Manechka, which is a lot closer to a place like Phoenix, where there was a lot of unrest, unfortunate circumstances between community members, became a racial thing to an extent. People in Manechka say that definitely they heard that, and it was very uncomfortable. And I think people's children, especially young children, to explain that this isn't fireworks, is a difficult thing.
Professor, you're old enough to remember what life was like before 1994.
Yeah, we got a shock of our life, but we are a miracle nation. See, within a week or two, we are back to normal. We just have a miracle, but this was reminiscent of what it was in 1976, 1986 to 1988, and the last shots of 1993, just before during the CODESA negotiations.
And of course, the run up to the 1994 elections as well, which saw a lot of violence in those few months before the elections took place.
It was terrible in Katlehong, the whole of the East Rand. That's why I think people were frightened, and it's not an easy thing to deal with, and we really have to appraise the police and the soldiers for managing the situation. We're not sure whether we are out of the woods yet, but I think the country is doing very well in terms of keeping peace and security.
So, Gigi, when you speak to your friends still in KwaZulu-Natal, and I know you've become an urbanized Zulu, for want of a better description, but when you speak to your friends back in KwaZulu-Natal, do they live in fear at the moment, or do they think things are over and life has returned to normal?
Look, I think it depends largely where you are. So a lot of the, where I grew up in Msinga, and Greytown and those kind of towns have been in many ways decimated. It's kind of, towns like Escort, nothing happened. Towns like Greytown were in many ways wrecked. Towns like parts of Tugela Ferry, Pomeroy, so these little rural towns are a mess. And so, the real impact of that is primarily we're talking about month end and social grants being paid out. A large proportion of the rural populations receive pensions or social grants, and excuse me, now they're having to take taxis, and in a place like Msinga, you can't go to Greytown, Pomeroy, or Tugela Ferry. So and those are normally 20 to 25 kilometers away. Now you're talking about going 80 kilometers away to say Escort. So, I think that and it's quite interesting, the kind of split between the towns that were wrecked and then everyone now going to the other towns that have had no impact. Places like, if you look at northern KZN, Hluhluwe, nothing happened in Hluhluwe, but places like Mkhuzi and Jozini and Bazwan and Co, had the impact there. So, Yeah, so the biggest impact has really been, the inability to get groceries, and I think the more kind of extreme impact is going to relate to social grants. Social grants are paid between the kind of 3rd and 7th of the month. They split between pensions and child grants. So those people are going to have to travel really far. So I think it's a double whammy. And the one, it's a distance, but more importantly, it's the cost of transport. Now you're taking a taxi where you were paying, say, 8 to 10 rand, 12 rand to go one way. Now you're paying 35 to 40 rand to go one way. And then joining, a 4, 5, 6, 7 hour queue outside any of the ATMs that are in place. So the rural areas in KZN which have been impacted, that's the primary kind of impact that they're feeling. And unfortunately, the impact's being felt primarily by those who weren't taking part. You'd kind of feel like there's some sort of justice if it was impacting the people who took part, but a large number of those people weren't there, and so on. So, they're living in rural areas. They wouldn't have been even close to those towns. So yeah, that's the primary kind of impact, and one that's going to take a while to resolve, because rebuilding a shopping center, putting in a new ATM and so on, building a new or re-equipping a bank branch, those things aren't so quick. Already I see the banks have said that they're not going to penalize anyone who draws from a bank that's not their bank, particularly for the social grant recipients. So and pension recipients. So I mean that's moving in the right direction.
Gigi, do I remember correctly that your mother is still in Msinga?
That's right. Lives in a mud hut in Msinga still.
And so how has it affected her?
Directly, it hasn't affected her. I mean, they're far enough away from a rural town. She's 25 kilometers down the worst road you can find. And her immediate community, it hasn't affected them at all. But the impact has been really around getting food, around the grants, and also being able to get people to the shops to do their grocery shopping. So yeah.
So has she had to go out to go looking for food, or has she been okay so far?
So my brother lives in Hilton and Pietermaritzburg, which was one of the areas that was defended by the local community, and was able to take stuff down to her and food parcels for the immediate kind of community around her. So so far so good. But I mean, it was quite interesting. Even my brother was buying stuff for the local community as well as my mother, and of course the stores were saying maximum of 20 items, and he was saying, well, I'm buying for 100 families. I was like, no, you get 20 items. But apparently the roads all the way there, all the farmers are out on the roads with, kind of selling and roadside trucks and stalls, particularly vegetables and so on. So they were able to stock up from roadside farmers.
Well, it's an interesting life, and that's for sure. So the time has just gone 8 p.m. and a huge welcome to everyone this evening. Tonight, we're looking into the soul of the Zulu nation. And I think given the last few weeks we've had in South Africa, there's so many people who are just so interested in actually trying to understand exactly what we went through, why and how, and what are people actually saying on the ground that will allow them to understand better what we went through and where do we stand as an actual nation. So a huge welcome to everyone around the world, especially to those people who are joining us from overseas. We've had a huge contingent of people overseas who've registered for tonight in places like Canada, the United States, England, France, Israel, not so much Australia, and we'll be talking to the Australians tomorrow. Apparently, their time does not allow them to watch these things live, so they catch up on YouTube a little bit later, and we think they should actually stay awake during the evening and watch more of our webinars. But to all of you around the world, and especially to the people in South Africa, on behalf of the South African Jewish Report, a big welcome to the 108th webinar since lockdown began. We've got an amazing panel this evening, and we will be joined shortly by Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi, who almost everyone in South Africa will know, and he's going to be going first, and then we're going to be talking to this remarkable, illustrious panel of experts and real people who will give us the no-nonsense actual facts on the ground. But before we begin, just a reminder that you need to pick up your copy of the Jewish Report. There's a new edition that's coming out tomorrow. If you haven't seen this week's edition, strongly recommend. It deals with a lot of the efforts to clean up the country, to deal with the damage, and deal with what's happening in shopping centers around the place. Really urge you to go pick up your copy of the Jewish Report, which of course you can find in places like Exclusive Books and Pick and Pay and Spar and your garage shop and your shul, now that shuls are open as well. Some of the schools, and I believe schools went back to school today. So please pick up a copy of the South African Jewish Report, and don't forget, you can read us on www.sajr.co.za. Should remember that SAJR, South African Jewish Report.co.za. Britt was supposed to put up that information on our screen, and I see she hasn't. So Britt, turn on your camera and at least let's say hello to you. You're on controls this evening. We hope Britt is behind her camera. Hi, Britt.
I'm sorry. I was waiting for a cue that I didn't realize. My bad.
Okay, but Britt, what we really want to tell people is we have another amazing webinar coming up on Thursday evening. If you can show us a slide for Thursday evening, because we've got the three great optimists of South Africa all together on a webinar. We've got Robbie Brosen, and we've got Adrian Gore, and we've got Mike Abel, and all three of them are going to be on a webinar on Thursday evening at 8 o'clock, and our webinar is called It's Been a Complicated Few Weeks. And we've said to them, absolutely, don't be unrealistic, but let's try to look for the good in what's happened over the last few weeks, and let's see where we can actually gain some positivity out of the experiences that we've had. So please join us Thursday evening, 8 o'clock. And Britt, you'll be monitoring the chat on YouTube and Facebook this evening. You'll be bringing questions over from those two platforms onto the Zoom platform as well. And we're going to have a conversation with all of our guests and our audience, who will be many thousands of people this evening. We'll have a two-way conversation. So Britt, thank you for everything that you're doing for us tonight. Thank you for giving up your evening in order to do that. And we will see you very shortly.
Cool.
And so to our illustrious panel, before we begin and before Prince Budalesi joins us, let's start with you, Professor. How are you feeling 2 weeks after a 4-day period of rioting and looting?
I think there's a sense of balance after the looting. There's a sense that South Africa has recovered, and I think is the nature of what South Africans are, and that makes prospects of a good future.
Okay, seeing we're doing our psychological touch base. Gigi, how do you feel?
Yeah, I'm very positive, and I would agree with the professor that we kind of have recovered. We move on. South Africans are incredibly resilient, but equally, I think that the terrible danger about what's just happened is also how it's over kind of emphasized, and yes, it's terrible, but it's not like it happened throughout the country. It's not like it happened in every township. The nature of it to a large extent was limited to certain areas. So we need to keep a bit of perspective about this and where we address it. we need to recognize that it's not the whole of South Africa, and it's not every township in Gauteng and KZN and so on. I think on the other hand as well, what is incredibly positive for me has been how also South Africans have stood up against this. I mean, and that's one of the stories that sadly are not told enough. I mean, in the township down the road from me in Diepsloot, by Tuesday morning, they were already, the Residents Association was going house to house, pointing out looters to the Metro Police and so there's so many stories where these were whole communities. There were parts of communities who were doing this. So, I mean, that's for me an incredible positive, and it's something we should be glorifying and talking more about. We have these amazing images of people looting and so on social media. We don't have many of the ones where, people in Soweto and Pimville or Diepsloot or whatever did positive things and community building things. So I'm positive because of that, but I just don't think that the whole story is always told enough, the whole true story.
And Ray, let's talk about how you feel.
Howard, I'm feeling positive. I'm feeling a sense of that we all need to take a bit more responsibility, and I think all stakeholders need to work together. There are challenges which I think we all knew about, but that I think the kind of events of 2 weeks ago really highlighted. There were, for example, poor people who were looting out of desperation during those events. So I do think that policymakers, business, labour, all stakeholders need to really work together to really resolve this South African problem, which I feel is rising inequality, and it is at the root of what happened. But I think the positivity comes from, I think, what Gigi said, and I think the professor touched on it as well. I think it's good to see South Africans rejected this and said that we can't be a state that does not have laws and where people follow those laws. So it was good to see community members from all walks of life coming together, defending their communities. You saw people, I mean, in KwaZulu-Natal, you had people sending food and airplanes, I saw, and ensuring that there was relief during a really hectic time. So that was really positive, and I think we have moved forward, but I think a lot of work to do.
So as we wait for Prince Buthelezi to join us, Gigi, you have an interesting story of how you were brought up, and I think some people watching would have seen you once before, but maybe can you just tell us how you became a white Zulu?
Sure. Long story. I'll try and tell it as quickly as possible. Basically, my parents were community workers, political activists, if you want, who moved with us as very, very young kids to a place called Msinga in KwaZulu-Natal, where they built a mud hut and brought us up. It's very much exactly like the local Zulus. We washed in the river. We had we were incredibly poor. My mother taught us under acacia tree, and our primary kind of skills were stick fighting and goat herding. In fact, as I mentioned just now, my mother still lives just like that. She walks down to the Tugela River to wash each evening, and still lives in the same mud hut where we grew up, refuses to change her life. So basically from there, I became a migrant worker as well. I was a political activist for a while, and then moved to they call Johannesburg Wandongazaduma, the place where the walls thunder, and I moved to Johannesburg, and I guess moved out of my kind of activism into business, and and started a business called Menanawe Marketing, which became the kind of first business to really focus on the township and informal sectors, and in the process also wrote 3 books, one called Third World Child, White-Born Zulu Bread, and then Casinomics.
My favorite one that I have in my hands right now, Casinomics, and if people haven't read it, they have to read it if you want to understand the real South Africa.
Thank you.
Sure.
So with that, Gigi, we'll talk to you a little later, but we are joined by Prince Buthelezi. It is such a great honor to have you on our webinar. Prince Buthelezi, where do you join us from?
Yes, thanks very much. Good evening, Ms. Sackstein and our fellow panelists. I was invited by you in this webinar in my capacity as Traditional Prime Minister of the Zulu Monarch and the nation. I must say I'm looking forward to the discussion this evening because the title, Into the Soul of the Zulu Nation, promises to take us on a unique, complex journey. But I will not make a speech. I'll just simply give you some opening remarks before taking your questions so that we can have a fruitful discussion. Because for those who may not know how I fit into the Zulu nation, I can in short say that my mother, Princess Makoko Dinizulu, was the full sister of King Solomon Dinizulu. King Solomon was the son of King Dinizulu, who was exiled on the island of St. Helena, and he was born on the island. Later, he gave his sister's hand in marriage to my father, Buthelezi. My father was later to be appointed as the king's prime minister. So for almost 70 years, then I've served in my hereditary position as Nkosi of the Buthelezi clan. And like my father, I've also served as Undunankulu Ngoyama Zulu, which means the traditional minister of the monarch and the Zulu nation. I was appointed to that position by my late first cousin, King Cyprian, son of King Solomon, in 1954. Later on, when his son took over, I continued in that capacity, and I kept on urging him to appoint his own prime minister, but he didn't do so until he passed away. So the history of the Zulu people is my own history. My great-grandfather, Nangalele, served under King Shaka, himself the founder of the nation. And my great-grandfather, Mnyamane, served as Prime Minister of King Cetshwayo and was Commander-in-Chief of the King's regiments during the Anglo-Zulu War. My grandfather, Mkhandumba, my tallest father, actually fought at the Battle of Isanjwana and survived. I relate all this just to give some idea of my ties to the Zulu nation. It's from this context that I will answer your questions, whether they be on the culture and identity of our nation, on the present dispute in the royal family, or on my feelings about the civil unrest that ravaged this province and Gauteng. In the Psalms of King David, in Psalm 145, we're reminded of the duty of one generation to speak to another, so that each successive generation will know the truth and be able to face the future armed with knowledge about the past. So I'm very grateful, therefore, for this chance to join friends and speak about matters of such significance to our country. Perhaps, Ms. Sackstein, you would like to kick off with some questions then.
I would. So Prince Buthelezi, first of all, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We know there's a long and deep friendship between yourself, the Zulu people, and the Jewish community. So it's so wonderful we can have you on a platform like this where thousands and thousands of people are watching tonight throughout the world. And may I say, you turn 93 next month and you're looking absolutely fantastic.
Well, thank you for the compliment. I don't think when I compare my earlier pictures, I do fantastic.
So, Prince, we've been through an enormously rough few weeks in South African history. And I'd like to understand your take. What do you think happened 2 weeks ago? What caused it? What sparked it? Why did it spiral out of control? What is your sense of what's actually happening on the ground?
I think the people and the world itself are quite aware this thing built up. Well, I think that built up to that crisis because of the issue of the former president, Mr. Zuma, who was actually in collision with the rule of law. And some people then threatened. In other words, they challenged the constitution by saying that he will not go to prison. And they threatened that there would be a pandemonium if he's arrested. And that, of course, happened. But then, of course, there were many people who climbed on the bandwagon. I mean, even criminals did so. But actually, the genesis of this kind of chaos in my country did not surprise me at all. Because in 1976, I worked very closely with Mr. Oliver Reginald Tambo, who was then the head of the ANC mission in exile. When there was an uprising in Soweto, they thought they were being suppressed by the young people who were in conflict with the police. So they announced as their policy that they wanted to make the country ungovernable. I was a member of the ANC as well. I tried to caution them. I said, if we do that, it should be ungovernable even when we're running the country, which has happened, in fact, because every citizen has a right to protest, as you know, Mr. Sackstein. But actually, in this country, there's not a single protest that doesn't result in destruction of property and violence. So that is what happened in a nutshell. I don't want to take time of the other panelists.
So when our president refers to this as an insurrection, do you agree with him? And he keeps on talking about the 12 people, the dirty dozen. Is it confined to a dirty dozen or is it much, much bigger?
Well, actually, one must remember that during the election of the ANC in Nazareth, that Mr. Ramaphosa, our president, only won that contest with only 200 votes. So quite clearly, they are torn from top to bottom. There's no doubt about factions in the party. Everyone knows it, not only in South Africa, but the whole world is aware of it. So there's no doubt about it, that there's this big rift in the ruling party.
So within the ruling party, is this confined? Is it a small little clique, or is this a mass-based uprising?
No, but when I've said that the ruling party is split, Mr. Sackstein, from top to bottom, and that the president only won with only 200 votes, then you can see that there is a very serious split in the big party. But then I've already said that there were other people who climbed on the bandwagon, including criminals as well, including people that were just desperate because they were hungry and so on. I mean, all sorts of people climbed in. I tried to warn Mr. Ramaphosa. I phoned him and said that we needed to back up the police because I could see that our police was quite weak. And at that time, I said the army should actually back up the police. I suggested that to him, in a conversation with him over the phone. And then after that, they only, the Minister of Defense made a remark which I found offensive. He said, "Oh, is there any war in KZN?" She said. But later, of course, when we're on the virtual with him and the president, he apologized and said he wasn't referring to me. But then they only deployed 500, whereas for COVID last year, they deployed more than 70,000 soldiers, So they dragged their feet about it. This thing could not have taken, the form it took if they had not dragged their feet. And the attitude, of course, of the Minister of Defense is interesting because later you remember that there was an argument, a public argument between himself and the president, where the president said this was an insurrection, and he tried to deny that. But later he tried to back up the president. But you can see that in itself is playing out the division that it is in the ruling party.
So do you think our president just didn't understand the consequences of putting Jacob Zuma in jail? Or did he understand and just not actually act? Because there is a story that comes out of some of my contacts in KwaZulu-Natal who say that President Ramaphosa allowed this to happen in order to give him the strength to go and attack his enemies within that province.
In order to
go after his enemies within the province, that he wanted it to spiral out of control so he would have an excuse for a greater clampdown on his opponents.
I honestly don't think so. I think it's quite unfair to say that, because, you know, I was a head of the KwaZulu government here in this province. I know that once the head of government gives instruction to a minister, then the minister must carry that out. You know, when I talked to him, he said that they were going to deploy the soldiers. And then when he spoke to the minister, he deploys only 2,500, you know. So I don't think it's fair to say that it was deliberate on his part.
So
because
is it incompetence? Is that what we're dealing with? Is it conspiracy or is it incompetence?
Who's incompetent?
Well, within our police force and our military and our intelligence, is it incompetence that we fail to act and act harmlessly? Or is it a conspiracy that there were greater issues at play?
No, in the first place, our police is very weak, you know. It's very weak. By itself, we cannot maintain law and order in this country. And I think it's not a secret also that the commissioner of police and the minister, or Mr. Tele, there's a big conflict between them. So actually, you can see that, you know, actually there are many factors which played into this thing, including the fact that because the police were incompetent, were not able to do it. If they had deployed soldiers immediately, you should not have had this catastrophe.
So could this catastrophe have been avoided? And how would you have avoided it? Was it legitimate to send Jacob Zuma to jail in the first instance? And is there any way we could have maintained rule of law and avoided the violence and looting that we saw over the last few weeks?
Look, Ms. Sackstein, I hold a press conference and I said to them, my great-grandfather, King Tejoayo, fought with the British and so on and routed them at Isandwana. But the Zulus were defeated on the 4th of July, 1879. But when he was arrested, the Zulu people were mighty then. Not a finger was raised. And later on, my grandfather, King Dinizulu's son, was also arrested. But there was no uprising. And in 1964, some of our top leaders in the ANC, Mr. Mandela, Sisulu, and all of them were arrested. But no one then started threatening the country with violence. Why should it be that one should even nest the idea that he should have known that Mr. Zuma's arrest would have resulted in this? Why would Mr. Zuma should actually be so important than all these people I'm talking, where there was no ructions at all when they were arrested? Why?
So what's the answer to that question? Because it was an insurrection.
I think I've already given the whole history. I've said that at Nasrec, the president only won the election with only 200 votes. That gives you the extent of the rift there is in the ruling party. You know, the reflection, you can see the rift in the ruling party. That Mr. Ramaphosa hasn't got the backing that Mr. Mbeki had. He hasn't got the backing that Mr. Mandela had. So therefore, on the ground, it was inevitable, therefore, that they who were supposed to maintain law and order, that they were at variance, they were at daggers drawn at that level. So on the ground was fertile, people were hungry, but there was other people, of course, who sympathized with Mr. Zuma, who were threatening even before that. So there were a number of factors. There were criminals, and there were others, of course, who did so because they said Mr. Zuma is untouchable.
So why do you think the president has kept many of these incompetent ministers in his cabinet? Why haven't we seen a cabinet reshuffle? Clearly, we have problems with intelligence. We've got problems in military. We've got problems in the police. Isn't this a perfect time for him to clean out the rot?
Well, everybody's clamoring for that. Whether he's going to do it, I don't know. But I mean, everywhere, even through the media, and many people are talking about that. Not only now, even before that, that he should, but you can see that what makes him look as if he has no backbone is the fact that he's actually dancing on eggs, if I may use that expression, because of this division in his party, because he hasn't got the backing that Mr. Mbeki had or that which Mr. Mandela had. So he hesitated. He hesitated because of the fact that he must be careful because he's not backed up by even his whole party.
Let's talk about KwaZulu-Natal politics, because, of course, you lead one of the great parties of KwaZulu-Natal. The IFP has been around since, 1975. How is politics playing out between the ANC and the IFP in KwaZulu-Natal at the moment?
Well, I don't know what you mean by that, Mr.
Well, we're heading for elections coming up in about 6 months' time. Do you see gains for the IFP? How do you think politics currently looks now after the weeks that we've had as we head into local government elections?
Well, I think those pontifications belong to the president of the IFP, not myself. I'm retired from the party, although I support the party, but I cannot speak ex cathedra about those matters because they belong to the leader of the party. But I know that in the by-elections that we've had in this province, we've even taken some seats from the IFA has taken some seats from the ruling party. But I cannot then, because of that, make a conclusion that, we're going to win. But that has happened already. In the recent by-elections, we're able to take 2 seats from the ANC.
So Selwyn, who's watching us, asked the question. He wants to know, what did you feel like when you saw kind of these Mercedes-Benz and luxury vehicles lining up to loot or emptying out shops? And it wasn't just the poor taking advantage. It was the middle class and the upper middle class who were actually going to steal as well.
My heart is bleeding. I hope yours is bleeding as mine. You see our country at my age, going to pieces like this. Because first of all, I think the economy of this country is mismanaged. Everyone knows that this country has been mismanaged and that there's corruption in this country. That's why we've got the Capture Commission. And the raters have said that our country has reached the junk status. I mean, our country is actually in dire straits already. And then the COVID came, and then this instability was there already in the country. It's very sad. I've always been concerned about the economy of this country. Because as a member of the ANC, when the ANC started launching the campaign against the country, economic sanctions and divestment, I went and saw Mrs. Thatcher. I went and saw Chancellor Kohl. I went to the Mercedes people. I went to the BMW, other companies. I went in Britain. I saw President Reagan. I saw President Bush. All of them appealing to them. I was sent and all in Holland. Taking a stand against my own party, the ANC, because I knew that this was not going to help us. To impose our country. I mean, the genesis of what we're seeing started there. The unemployment and joblessness actually was created from that time by those policies which were not wise. Look, I grew up in the ANC. The founder of the ANC, Dr. Seme, was married to my aunt, King Dinizulu's eldest daughter. And when I was doing matric, I did errands for him. I grew up in the ANC. And I know that in the ANC, we all believe in nationalization and socialism. That is why, in fact, I went to see President Nyerere because he was the guru of socialism in the continent of Africa, and went to learn about it. But already, President Nyerere had second thoughts about it. He gave me his book 10 years after Arusha. And when he visited this country, he visited me when I was Minister of Home Affairs in my office. He told me an interesting story. He said that when Mr. Mugabe was actually elected as Prime Minister in 1980, he actually said, in reference to the economy of Zimbabwe, he said that we have inherited a jewel. Don't do what Nyerere did in Tanzania. Don't destroy it. In other words, he abandoned it. But in this country, even Madiba had his Damascus experience just when he took over, when he sort of embraced the market system. So when Mr. Mbeki came out with his policy, GEAR, the acronym for Growth, Employment and Redistribution, I went to the podium in Parliament and congratulated them. But what happened? The leader of KwaZulu, many of them are communists, and the Communist Party, they threatened that the roll mass action. The economy of this country has been destroyed because, of that thing, because there's a lot of flirtation with socialism in this country. This our economy was stronger than any other economy in Africa. But actually, we have destroyed it ourselves by mismanaging the economy.
So, Prince, let us say tomorrow the president calls you and he says, I don't know what to do to get out of this mess. What advice do you give him?
Well, actually, I think it would be presumptuous for me, to pretend to be cleverer than the president. But I've already portrayed to you in my remarks what I believe in. I don't think that the market system, the free market system, is perfect. But I don't know any other system that human beings have devised which has the potential for creating jobs better than the free market system, which they have always not tried to embrace. They've always flirted with socialism. I mean, it'd be better to go to the drawing room and start from there. That is what I would do.
And when young people in KwaZulu-Natal come to ask for sage advice, you've had more experience than they have. What do you tell them about the future of South Africa?
Well, the young people of South Africa, I know some of them supported me, later they didn't support me, but they know that even when the ANC, which was my organization in which I belonged, when they say liberation now, education later, I came out with the slogan, education for liberation. I erected schools, with a strong shoestring budget because the government knew that I was opposed to apartheid and that I was actually a member of the ANC. But not only that, I supported with the king, the University of Zululand, when they were saying it was a tribal college, it should not be supported, should be abandoned. I supported it and I was chancellor for 21 years. Because I've always had a heart for young people. Then my friend, Miss Harry Oppenheimer and Bridget, they used to invite me for dinner at Brenthurst. And then after dinner, we would move in one direction and talk politics. And then he would say to me, what can we do as business? And because as chancellor, when these young people knelt before me, when I kept them, they said, what is the use? Because we don't have jobs. What is the use of graduating? So I asked Mr. Oppenheimer to assist me to mobilize funding. And we've got the Mangosuthu University in Umlazi, which I erected, not with government funds. I mean, they know that's the route that I followed in the past. And that's the route I would continue to follow.
So, Prince, may we turn to the royal family, and it's just remarkable that when you talk about your grandfather and your great-grandfather and these great names of Zulu and South African history, it's actually chilling to speak to a descendant of some of these remarkable icons of South African history. So tell us about the Zulu royal family and the Zulu people. And then we're going to come and talk about some of the recent ructions. But give us a sense of history of the proud nation that is the Zulu people.
Well, I'm very proud of my nation because the oldest movement in Africa is the African National Congress. And the founder of the African National Congress was a lawyer, Dr. Pixiga Isakaseme. He was married to the eldest daughter of my grandfather, King Dinizulu, you know? And the first president was Dr. Dube, who also came from us. And the first Nobel Peace Prize winner in this country was Albert Luthuli, Inkosi Albert Luthuli. You know? I mean, that has been the route which some of the Zulu great men have done in this country. And that is why the ANC dumped me when in 1979, Mr. Tambo invited me to London and said to me and my delegation, I should support the armed struggle, I should support sanctions. We could not agree because I did not believe that we should move away from what Dr. Seme and the founding fathers of the ANC actually adumbrated as policy in 1912, that our struggle for liberation should be conducted through non-violence and negotiation. They said that they would liberate this country through, through arms. And in America, some of my black brothers there actually tried to attack me. They said, you come from a great people, a warrior nation, which is true. I mean, I'm a descendant of generals, who fought these wars. And my grandfather was Eti Sanjuan, But they said, why is it that you don't support, the armed struggle? I said, they say, because you are a descendant of generals. I said, precisely. Because I'm a descendant of generals. I knew that my ancestors, the kings and my generals of the Buthelezi family, they went on a campaign in order to get cattle and booty. If there's violence in South Africa, there'll be no booty, it will be only ashes. That's where I come from.
So, Prince, give us a sense, for those of us who've been to places like Isandwana, one of the greatest defeats ever of a British army anywhere in the world, this remarkable strategy, this remarkable warrior nation, what does it feel like personally to know that it is your ancestry that and your blood that flows through those veins that carries this history?
Well, I'm very proud because today people glibly talk about the armed struggle, but that was the armed struggle that took place at that time. I think it was the last gallant, although in some other parts of Africa, of course, I shouldn't say the Zulus only, because of his Kukuni of the Bapedi put up a very strong fight to the extent that King Kejoy admired him. And in the Cape, there were Kefa wars, actually, in which our Xhosa-speaking kings also did so. But I'm very proud, of course, to come from this line. And actually, when they thought I was a coward in not supporting the armed struggle of the ANC, because I knew that, actually would not inherit anything. I said, my people who went to war to get cattle and beautiful women to marry after the war. But if we have a war in South Africa, we'll only pick up ashes.
So let's talk about the royal family at the moment. I think for many of us who are not part of the Zulu nation, watching from aside, it's been a little confusing. We all knew King Goodwin Zwelithini and his tragic death recently and his planting. That seems to have created some confusion over the line of succession and who's actually in charge and when will we have a new Zulu monarch and what is this conflict that we're seeing and the split that we're seeing within the royal family today?
Well, the conflict is completely unnecessary because when King Zwelithini passed away, he left a will in which he appointed his wife, the princess, the daughter of King Sobhuza II. King Sobhuza II's daughter, her dowry, it was collected by myself from Amakhosi and the people of the Zulu nation. And when a king asks the nation to collect cattle for the dowry of a woman, then he contractually binds himself that the heir will come from that house. So when he put on his will that the Queen Mantombi, the Swazi princess, must succeed him, we knew that he was actually pointing out that the heir must come from that house. So when she passed away, she left a will as well. And in that will, she named her eldest son, Prince Zulu, to take over. And as far as we're concerned, he's on the throne. He's the king even now. But sadly, some members of the royal family have been grooming someone who's not even coming from the 6 wives of the king. I mean, someone that the king actually fathered from a girlfriend. They're grooming him, that they want him to be the king. So I think that the actions of the premier of the Zulu of KwaZulu-Natal has confused me. When the princess, Queen Mantombi, was in charge, she actually said that if there was any query, he should consult me. And he consulted me a couple of times. But after that, he has had secret meetings with other members of the royal family, without my knowledge, without me. In other words, these people have picked up courage from them. You know, I've never, Ms. Sackstein, I've never conflated my position when I was in leader of the political party and that of my position as prime minister. I've never conflated them. People who supported me because of my policies and so on. You know, because you know that in 1994, even whites in this province voted for me. But then later, of course, they went to a white party, the DA. You see? So I've never done so. So some of them, you know, have got a narrative which is absolutely wrong. That's when I saw the king asked me to help him. I mean, at 92, I'm very busy. I was with the king yesterday. I've been with the king so many times a week and so on to help him. Then they think that I'm looking for political support. But I'm not even a leader of the party now, nor have I ever tried to conflate my position. But then I remember that there was one premier of the ANC in the past at one time who said about the late king that they have got the king in their pockets, you know. So that is playing out now because I cannot understand why the premier, Mrs. Galala, should now completely cut off anything from me and I should be here. He has had meetings with the widows of the king, with the queen, and with the siblings of King Zwelithini without my knowledge, and so on. They are the ones who are stirring this pot of conflict in the Zulu kingdom.
So explain to us how it works. Will there be a formal inauguration of the king, or is the king on the throne? He's already assumed a position, and we move from there.
But the king has already addressed the nation twice, publicly, even about the unrest. He has actually addressed it from our part. You know, when my great-grandfather, King Dinizulu, you know, because he was exiled twice. He was exiled to Middleburg after the Zulu rebellion of 1906. So his body then was transported to here, to Nobamba. Immediately after his burial, the principal induna saluted a brother who was older than Solomon with the Budalesi salute, Bayete. But then my uncle King Solomon produced a letter written by his father, King Dinizulu, appointing him. So he showed him. So the older brother said, "This is my father's handwriting." So right there, he was given Bayete like that. We're already saluting the king like that. To us, he's the king. But some of them, they are still saying that he's Prince Zulu. You know, we're trying to stir this pot of conflict. But I think the role of the premier and government has many questions that need answering. Their role now, because they are complicating the situation.
So is the Premier of KwaZulu-Natal just playing politics? Is it ANC politics that he's trying to play in what he's doing in order to make sure that the throne supports one side? What is his motivation?
I'm sure we have articulated it as you see it. It's not for me then to say, yes, it is so.
You know something? You will never retire from politics with an answer like that. Prince Buthelezi, can we join in some of our other people this evening to join you in this conversation? I don't know how much of your time that we have. So at any point in time, you please feel free to excuse yourself. But if you do have the time, we'd love you to join in the conversation with some of the other people on our panel.
No, I would like to do that. You know, my late king was actually had a good relationship with the Jewish people. You had a good relationship with Israel, you know.
Yeah, and I know you have many supporters within the KwaZulu community and throughout South Africa, amongst our community as well. And so I trust Mkhulisi, you actually know. This isn't your first encounter with the gentleman.
Yeah, one of our members of parliament was Ruth Rabinowitz, who was the daughter of the chief rabbi. I always call him my Julu.
Well, we've had a few Jewish Zulus. We had, for example, Johnny Clegg.
Oh, absolutely correct.
And and Ray, I don't know. Do we have to circumcise you in order to bring you into the clan?
Pardon?
I'm asking Mkhulisi if we need to circumcise him to bring him into the clan.
Yes.
Ray, let's get Gigi to turn on his camera as well, and the professor as well. Fantastic. So Prince Buthelezi, you were in fact best man at Gigi's parents' wedding. I don't know if you know that.
At which wedding?
So Gigi Alcock. Gigi, tell Prince Buthelezi the story.
Pardon?
So you'll see. So Gigi Alcock will just unmute himself, and he will tell you the story of how you were best man at his parents' wedding.
Oh yes.
I'm sharing it. So my mother is Krina Alcock, and obviously my father Neil Alcock. So
good evening.
In Msinga,
yeah.
So it's like a family gathering that we have here. But Ray, tell us your perspective. You call yourself a millennial. You're of a slightly different generation. Tell us within KwaZulu-Natal, when you speak to your friends and your family about what happened over the last few weeks, what do they tell you?
Well, firstly, I think I just want to extend greetings to the Prince of Wapindange. As I said to you, he is my grandfather, so it's wonderful to be sharing stage with him, and also Prof as well, and Gigi. But I think to answer your question, Howard, you know, I think there's always optimism. I think the challenges are there, and I think as a generation, as I said earlier, we've experienced something that is uncomfortable, and something that we obviously didn't get to experience during apartheid South Africa, as we weren't alive. But I think young people are very optimistic, and they feel, a duty and a responsibility to this country. It's been very good to a lot of young people, but unfortunately hasn't been good to all young people. And there is, for example, a youth unemployment that is unsustainable. But I think generally amongst our peers, there is optimism, but there is concern as well in terms of I think the future and the management of the country. But I think young people have the power at the polls.
And how do young people actually plan on using that power at the poll? Do you think anything has shifted politically within the province in the last 2 weeks?
Definitely, I think there would be concerns within this, particularly the ruling party, because I don't think it's comfortable for any young person to have gone through what they went through, or all people, to be worried about where you're going to get fuel, food. It's almost, as I said, a horror movie. And we've heard the Zimbabwe notion before. And it's one thing to hear something, but it's one thing to be living something for, 3 to 4 days, if I can call it that. And I do, the elections have always been definitely in the last municipal election, it was relatively close. I think in the last provincial election, the Prince will tell you that I think at the election centre in Durban, the ANC just snuck through in terms of in this province, if I can call it that. And if there's not a 50%, if they don't reach 50+1, if I can call it that, then it allows the second highest party in the opposition to form a coalition. So the case, and the ruling party would be worried. But there definitely is a political shift, and I think a dynamic that could be worrying the party.
So, right, this may be a completely unfair question, but do you know anyone who looted? Like in your extended friendship circle, like, is there anyone who's prepared to say, yeah, I was at the macro store, I took a TV? Is that unfair? Is that a terrible question to ask?
I think it's a terrible question, but to answer you, I actually do know someone who looted. And I wouldn't say he's not a friend, but he is someone that I know. And it's unfortunate that he is someone that had a privileged education. And I think that was also one of the things that was concerning, is that it came across as just purely criminal. And there is a legal scenario between him and the person who exposed him. But I actually, unfortunately, do know someone who isn't a friend, but someone who I do know from school days who did loot.
Do you think there's remorse?
Definitely, I think there's remorse. I think there's regret as well. I don't think it's something that he would be proud of. I think once things are on social media and on Google, they never disappear, and I don't think you want your face around the internet, and you don't really want to be trending for the wrong reasons. And unfortunately, we're proud to be millennials, but some of us don't do things that are smart, and there are some consequences that I think that will come with, not just now, but I think long term.
Professor, give us your take on the last few weeks of South African history. How do you see it?
Personally, I looked at the case of last 2 weeks as a very complex scenario. It's a myriad of issues. First, it's sheer criminality. Second, there's a layer of poverty where people, not because of poverty they looted, but they took advantage of the ineptness of police, and also of the situation that there was nobody who was able to deal with it. Thirdly, there are areas of concern in South Africa that once we got our democracy, we had focused largely on, in terms of social cohesion, on the black-white relations in terms of trying to get the reconciliation. But we have not dealt with the issues of black-on-black relations to the extent that the issues of ethnicity are very, very strong, and we cannot shy away from them. There is this us-them dichotomy in our discussion all the time. And other than that, I also see that this us-them also goes for the group that felt they could have won the elections in the last elections in the ANC, and they have planned, they've galvanized themselves into a solid source. And there's also the measure of the state capture, the group that is apparently targeted or identified to have fingered certain resources of the state. And they also see JZ. The arrest of JZ has got a number of ramifications that if JZ is arrested, there are other people who are likely to be arrested. And for that reason, all these people have been quiet even in the unrest. They are not condemning it by any chance. They're just keeping quiet. There is just a lull in their situation. But other than that, also there is the issue of the JZ arrest, which has been coming, and people have been saying there will be unrest, and you can follow on those lines. There are a number of lines that one can follow in terms of my understanding of the whole thing. It's not simple, it's not linear, it's very complex.
So, Prof, you spoke about black-white relations, but one of the key kind of fault lines in KwaZulu-Natal that we've seen as well is Indian-black relations within the province as well. And yeah, we've seen people trying to drive wedges there at the moment. How do you see that situation?
I see that as a result of negative reporting as well. That I don't think the issue the issue of Phoenix, it's not, I would not say with certainty what is the cause, but I would assume that there could have been looting in Phoenix, and therefore the manner in which the other group is the citizens of Phoenix might have overreacted, and the media might have also misinterpreted what is happening, and that has added fuel to the fury.
So, Gigi, you have this really interesting background. You culturally and ethnically Zulu. You just so happen to have a white skin, but you actually weren't in KwaZulu-Natal where it happened. Your network is very much within the Gauteng region. You've written, we keep on telling people about this book, Kazinomics, the story of how the real economy works within South Africa, and this underground economy which we don't count in our figures and we don't count as part of our GDP, and we don't really understand, but so many people are involved and employed in this economy. But when you speak about Gauteng, what do you think happened in Gauteng?
Yeah, Howard, I just want to start off by saying just about, although I'm in Gauteng, I must point out that the closest town to Gela Ferry was the scene of a widely spread social video which showed the manager of the Tugela Ferry ShopRite pouring cooking oil and water on the floor of the ShopRite, and managed to defend the ShopRite, one of the few shops that weren't raided. So I just want to point out the people of Msinga and Tugela Ferry are highly innovative, and there's maybe a lot the country could learn from this. So, anyway, yeah, so if we just look at, so I just want to start and kind of say, you know, we've got to look at kind of context on the one hand, the second we need to look at the spark, and the third we need to look at the kind of flame of what happened. And I think when we look at the context, the other speakers have mentioned the RET faction, the MVA faction, but we also have to consider that in KZN, the ANC has been in complete war with itself. And I'm not talking just a political war, but assassinations. And there was a book, in fact, recently written by Greg Ode called War Party, which actually showed the assassinations and the massive conflict that's been happening in KZN. So a lot of what has happened has been this dramatic split between the ANC and KZN, but also supported by not just a split, but a violent split with political assassinations and so on. So that's the kind of context in KZN of the ANC. What we saw in terms of a spark, I believe, was a very deliberate thing. If we look at where this started, let's just use Gauteng. There was specific initial violence happened primarily in the proximity of the migrant worker hostels with the rural Zulus in those places. Vosloorus, Thokoza, Katlehong, which has always in the 1980s was a massive center of conflict. The downtown Johannesburg around the Denver, George Bach and JP hostels, Jabulani, Diepkloof, Meadowlands, Mamelodi Hostel, and so on. So the spark actually initiated to a large extent, even if you look at Umlazi, the burning of the center there were directly opposite the hostels, which again, if we use context, those hostels have been the center of massive violence. So I believe that they were utilized to spark the conflict. And you can practically take every single place where the initial action happened, Alexandra next door to Madala Hostel and so on and so forth. This is where the initial spark happened. And I don't see it as a Zulu thing. I see it as an ANC plant, the certain faction of the ANC planting people in those spaces. And what we saw happening was, the initial attacks on shopping centers and factories and so on were specifically targeted. I mean, previously when we've had xenophobic violence, Somali and other immigrants, spaza shops have been looted and burnt. There were very few spaza shops, Somali or otherwise, that were affected in any way. People walked straight past them and straight to the shopping centers. The shopping centers were attacked initially by armed groups who were firing automatics at the security primarily and some of the police. And then, of course, the mobs joined in and took advantage of this. So I think we have to see, and that for me, the spark was a very deliberate spark. It was focused in terms of places, utilizing a certain dynamic. And then if you look at it, what happened was, and in fact, I was interviewed by Alcock in May 2020. And at the time I said, we're in a lawless society, and we're in a society where, the rule of law is not enforced, particularly in township environments. And if people get hungry and people get frustrated and so on, they will start helping themselves. And look, I got it wrong by 12 months, but the point is that I don't believe that employment was the driver of this in any way. I believe it was primarily driven by frustration built around lockdown. And yes, of course, there's a bit of poverty in there. But the primary thing is lockdown, the frustration, unemployment levels, people not being able to have a drink. It sounds kind of silly, but I mean, some of the first places that were looted were bottle stores and so on. So, I think that there was a general frustration that we've been locked down and there's a lot of credibility issues around lockdown, around enforcing lockdown, that people at every level have experienced the absurdity of some of the lockdown. And so this for me has been an explosion of that. But as I said earlier, I think that the thing that we mustn't forget is that large numbers of people in these communities, elders, residents associations, taxi associations and so on, actually stood up against the looters, or after the fact went and pointed out looters and so on. So we must put this in that perspective of not just saying, people did this. We make this terrible mistake of saying, the townships did this, people did this. The reality is that as a proportion of those populations of a place like Soweto or Mamelodi or Alexandra or Mlazi or Wamashu and so on were a small proportion of the populations of those places, and it didn't take long for within 2 or 3 days, you started getting residents associations, and sadly, like the Prof pointed out, the media has painted certain things around either Indian or white or mainly white, whatever community groups. I think this is a mistake. I think that the reality is that there were many unpublicized community groups in townships, in shack settlements, Diepsloot. The people in the Residents Association and the shack settlement, the poorest part of Diepsloot, were the people who were going shack by shack and pointing out their neighbors. So I think it's very important we keep the context of that. It's not everyone. It's not all township people. It's not all poor people. To a large extent, it was greed and organized, and then the frustrated, call it poorer people, took advantage of that.
So let's ask Prince Buthelezi, how do we fix up this mess? What do we do from now? What's the healing that has to take place in KwaZulu-Natal? And who do the people listen to? Is the king the unifying force that can impose a culture of understanding and law on the people of KwaZulu-Natal, or does it come from the politicians? Who are the people that the crowd will listen to?
Are you putting that to me?
Yes, please, Prince Buthelezi.
No. Well, I think that all of us together, I don't think that we can single out any group as such and say they have got the panacea for our problems. I think that all of us, leadership at all levels, religious leaders, political leaders, the king, and all leaders at various levels need to deal with this. I can't say that there's one group or entity that has got a panacea for this. That's my view.
Okay. Well, do people listen to the king?
In fact, some phoned me from Umtalu, right in the South Coast, saying they wanted to hear what the king is saying about what is going on. That actually happened, because they wanted to know what he felt about it. And after he spoke, there were a lot of appreciation from quite a number of people. In fact, the king and I were together yesterday, and yesterday, and he suggested to me that if necessary, he would ask me to accompany him to go to the townships, to go to Phoenix if necessary. He's prepared to go there with me, and I'm prepared to accompany him if it comes to that.
So, Professor, is this actually part of the process? Is this what we should be doing? Should the king and all of his council be on the streets all the time? Should we make sure that in fact the politicians on the street all the time, and let them go house by house and mend the culture that we saw over the last few weeks? Will it take all the religious leaders? Will it take everyone a concerted effort? And are we actually going to see that? Is there the political will to actually restitch back together some sort of consensus and community within KwaZulu-Natal?
I think what you should do, it's going street to street. It's not the panacea. It is going back to our roots, going back to our morals of holding peace and understanding the rule of law, and also understanding authority. The authority of the king needs to be respected at all costs. And therefore, because when the king goes to Phoenix, the next time they will say, he has not come to our village. The king is choosy, he goes to rich people, he's not going to us, it's not coming down to us as the poor people. And the media will follow the king to particular spaces and not to other spaces. Yes,
I wonder why you say that.
No, but it's an effort, Prince, with due respect. It's an effort to try to go to as two places. But what I would understand is everybody should understand that if we understand what the rule of law requires, and if we understand the authority of the king as well, is to respect the authority of the king. If he has got a voice, he has to give his voice. His father used to instruct, and everybody would listen. And I hope, with the respect that he commands, he should be able to do so.
So, Ray, talk about young people. Talk about what young people would like to see in order to rebuild the province and to rebuild the trust that we have within each other.
Young people are frustrated. They don't have work. They go to school. They are educated. They are not placed in jobs. The grants that are given are not enough, and there's a need for making sure that transformation goes deeper, and also if you look at the political level, it's all old people who are occupying all these positions, and we are not creating spaces for young people at all. And we should really understand that at a particular age, we should terminate our services as old people and create spaces for the young people. And we should work hard to make sure that the young people get access to the resources of the country. And otherwise, you have got the children of the rich who become richer and richer all the time, and who have got access, and the children of the poor remain poorer. And then you give them 350 rand a month. What do they do with it? Does not even pay rent. It does not even pay electricity. It's not worth the paper it's written on.
So, Ray, how do we give people hope?
Young people or people in general?
Well, let's start with young people, and then let's talk about people in general.
I think young people want to have an opportunity to become something and to become someone in South Africa. And I think if I can go back to what the Prince mentioned earlier, you know, without an economy that is conducive to absorb graduates and kind of a system where people go into it and they can grow. I think your generation and the generation before, that was the case. You know, you went to school, you focused on what you focused on, you qualified or you graduated, and there was a path for you to become something. In this particular environment, we have a scenario where the majority of young people in South Africa don't have that. And I speak as a young person, and I'm quite fortunate that I have that, but I am unfortunately in the minority, and that is sad. So I think we definitely need to restructure our economy. We need to create an economy that allows for business to feel that it is conducive, and for them to invest and grow. I mean, the events of 2 weeks ago, some business people will be paid out and some of them won't reinvest in businesses. And that is job losses. And that just makes the situation of young people seeking employment even worse, because a conducive environment has not been created for people to believe that they can create businesses that thrive, they can create businesses that employ young people. And I think also to kind of position young people, you know, for this new revolution. I mean, it is a fourth industrial revolution, and the skills that we are acquiring are unfortunately also becoming redundant. So I think the only way, really, Howard, to answer your question, is for us to really restructure the economy and look at it a bit differently than what we have done.
Ray, we keep on hearing that maybe 50,000 informal traders lost their jobs. They lost their goods, they lost their businesses. Is that something that's easy to reestablish? Will we see the 50,000 coming back? Or is this kind of a permanent detrimental blow to them as small business people?
I think it's going to be very difficult, Howard. I mean, these people are not people who are insured. And there is a lot of people that suffer as a result of one informal trader. You know, they're responsible for 5, 6, 7 people within a family or extended family. It's going to be very difficult to come back. And I really think that there should be relief for them to get back on their feet as quickly as possible. Because they do play an important role, and it is something that contributes to a lot of people's livelihoods in this country. So I don't think it's going to be simple, but I do hope that there are. I mean, the president spoke on Sunday. I think he did touch on relief, and I'm hoping that they have been included in that.
Gigi, you were talking earlier, you seemed a little more optimistic that this, in fact, creates a lot of opportunity for people.
Yeah, look, I'm not sure if I'd say it creates a lot of opportunity, but yeah, I think certainly well, let me start off with the, my books and stuff is around the concept of the informal economy being huge. The spaza sector's worth 150 billion rand, the fast food sector's worth 90 billion rand, and so on. And there's thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of small businesses out there that are not recognized in terms of the space. Interestingly, what we've seen since now particularly in Gauteng and parts of KZN, the township parts of KZN, is that many of these informal businesses, whether they were vegetable traders, whether they were spaza shops and so on, were not affected by this. They closed their doors and literally reopened after this happened. So a lot of the sector is being supplied. In fact, the Joburg Fresh Produce Market is the largest vegetable market in South Africa, turns over about 7 billion rand a year. One of the agencies at the Joburg Fresh Produce Market said that, we wrote an article, came out on Monday, saying that the Durban and Johannesburg markets have in essence had a massive drop-off from formal supermarkets and so on buying vegetables from these markets, and actually the informal sector, and there was a specific line that the informal sector has come to the rescue and is picking up the volumes from the agricultural sector, that the formal supermarkets will have a much longer lag before they actually rebuild, restock, and so on. So I mean, I think on two levels. The first level is that those businesses are going to be able to start going quickly. They will benefit from it, and they are job creators and income creators to township communities. I think that overall the future. We've tried this with massive businesses and large businesses and so on. The future is going to be in both the formal and informal sector, small businesses, and the government should be looking at better ways to stimulate that. And I agree with Ray. We're in a new world, where we have gig economies and work from home and so on. The formal and informal small business sectors are in a better position to create jobs and opportunity and generate incomes. But we don't, as far as I'm concerned, the government doesn't look at it that way. And there's a lot of things that they're not doing, which we would need to look at. I do think that in the last, since lockdown and now with the unrest, there is an increased awareness of the role played by this informal sector. Like I mentioned, just the market talking about it and so on. So hopefully this awareness translates into support of that sector.
So Prince Buthelezi, when international investors come to ask you the question and they say, is this over? Are we back to normal now? Should we keep our Mercedes plant in KwaZulu-Natal or should we move it somewhere else? What do you say to them? Is the chaos finished or are we still on a knife edge?
No, I think that even at the height of apartheid, we never abandoned hope. And a friend of mine, Sir Lawrence van der Post, whenever I was in London at his flat, he would always quote R.L. Stevenson, that it's better to travel in hope than to arrive. And I think that even now we should not do so. We should not abandon hope in spite of what has happened. I think all of us, or most of us in this talk are believers, and therefore I don't think that we can say God is no longer sitting on the throne in spite of this, because even in the past there were pestilences and things like this. But I'm very worried just now. The only reason, Sackstein, I'm hanging on is because when I wound up the KwaZulu government, the bits and pieces that were under the KwaZulu government, which were under the king, I passed a law called Ngoyama Trust land and put it under the king as the sole trustee. Now, Mr. Ramaphosa in July 1918 met with the king in my presence and said, no, now that they are going to pass the law of expropriation without compensation. You know, I'm very worried about that. I believe that that should be done, but I believe we've got a law already which does permit expropriation without compensation. I'm worried about when you talk about investors, whether investors in South Africa or abroad, that if I was one of them and I was invited to a country where there was a law of expropriation without compensation, I wouldn't go to that country unless I needed my head read. I wouldn't go to that country. You see, I'm very worried about that.
So let's talk about the Ngoyama Trust for a second, seeing you brought it up, because there are certainly people out there who believe that this entire issue of land expropriation would really make much more sense if we took tribal authority land and government-owned land and we redistributed that to the people, because over 60% of the land of South Africa is owned either by municipalities, provincial governments, national government, or in tribal trusts. So, but that solution doesn't seem to be palatable to the Zulu royal family. There's a big chunk of KwaZulu-Natal where people reside, but they don't have title to the land on which they reside. What's your view on that?
No, actually, I have no problem with your view about doing that. You know, on the other hand, I know that people who believe in socialism, they believe the country must all be owned by the state and so on. And there are people who believe in that, who are salivating for that, who want that happen because they believe everything should be owned by the state. So I have no problem about your views about getting that together. But at present, people have access to land in the areas that are falling under the king, because if a person wants an area to build or to plant crops, he needs just to approach an Induna and the Nkosi and do that.
I think one of the key things of land ownership is that if you have title to your own land, you can go to a bank and take a loan against it and start a business, and that kickstarts the economy. Ray, I don't know what your perspective is on this. You're an entrepreneur. How do we help kickstart the KwaZulu-Natal economy now?
No, I really understand what you're saying, but I don't think that I'll pontificate on that.
Okay, let's hear the view of our entrepreneur on the panel, Ray Mkhulisi.
Pardon?
We're going to ask Ray for his view on the issue.
Just clarify the question, please, for me, Howard.
So Ray, one of the key things in trying to kickstart an economy is to get people an asset so they can go to a bank and take a loan against a piece of land or a shack or something and use that money to start a business. Is that a realistic scenario for KwaZulu-Natal?
I think it is a realistic scenario. I think it is a realistic scenario provided that the expropriation of land with compensation, or a willing buyer, willing seller, which I think if it was a system that was well implemented, would allow for people to get that opportunity. But I do think that traditional leadership is important. It's part of who we are. And I don't think that the current structure should be changed, i.e. the Ngoyama Trust in this particular case. I think people have the opportunity to live on the land, to farm the land, and to build infrastructure on the land, income generating infrastructure. But I think, as you said before, Howard, there is a lot of land that is owned by the state, and that could be given to people if they're looking for land. But definitely a willing buyer, willing seller scenario that is well managed would be good, because I do think that if there's expropriation without compensation, as you rightly asked the Prince, I think any investor in this country or anywhere around the world wouldn't be so comfortable to come and invest. And even us as young entrepreneurs wouldn't be optimistic about starting businesses and building them in an environment that allows for that. So I do think it's important to kind of distinguish what sort of land is there and how it should be allocated to people. I think that goes down to stuff being managed appropriately.
Okay. Gigi, to re-ask the question to you, from your perspective, do you think the chaos is over? Are we back to normal again?
Yes, yeah, definitely think it's over in terms of the way we've experienced it and we've seen it. And I think that, you know, while the police and so on didn't do much and then struggled to contain it when they did start doing something, I think that situation has changed and there's, you know, quite a strong enforcement. The problem, of course, is that the underlying political issues and potentially economic issues have not been addressed. So, you know, what we've seen is the flame. If the spark happens again, what's going to stop that flaming up? And I think that, you know, we should make the best of a crisis. What is the opportunity to handle this? And it's not. I agree with the professor. It's not giving a 350 Rand grant. You know, average hawker makes that in a day's trading, selling fruit and vegetables. So I think that yeah, definitely over. And I think what's also emerged from this is a sense of civic strength. You know, where people are kind of, this won't happen and I'll watch again. You know, we were caught off guard and it's not going to happen again. The taxi industry is an example, the community residents associations and so on. So all of those, I think, will limit that activity happening. And I think there's also a collective shame about this, you know, about even those who didn't take part, who are like, these are our people, these are our communities, how could this happen? And that collective shame is something, you know, we're talking about people who are proud of, you're very dignified, you know, even poor people, generally a lot of dignity and self-respect. And this shame is very strongly felt. And so I think that shame translates into, no, this is not going to happen again. But yeah, we can't just leave it there. We need to address how we take it to the next level. How do we empower those civic organizations, those residents associations, those communities? And how do we also ensure that the rule of law is implemented? You know, there's a lot of talk about this was caused by poverty. My argument is rubbish. That wasn't caused by poverty. There's poor people in Mozambique and Zambia and so on who don't do this kind of thing. That actually South Africa as a whole has a serious issue of lawlessness. And whether that's you and I paying a bribe or driving home after a few little drinks instead of an Uber, or whether it's a politician stealing a few million, or whether it's someone running away with a flat screen TV or a bag full of maize meal, it doesn't actually matter until we enforce a sense of the set of law and get rid of the lawlessness within our society. We have no way of growing our business sector, whether it's small businesses or big businesses, because we'll have crime and corruption and so on. So that's the underlying fundamental that I think we're going to have to address. It's not poverty, it's not inequality. Our starting point is about ensuring that the rule of law is enforced, that there are consequences, that not only are you arrested, but you are charged, and so on. And that's across every spectrum of our society. And that lawlessness, and it's not morality, it's actually about lawlessness and ensuring that that's enforced. And once we have that, I think most of the other things will emerge from that.
So in our last few minutes, Professor, let's ask you a quick question. Are there green flags that come out of all of this? Are there signs of hope and signs of encouragement that we can take away with the people surrounding their malls, the sort of thing that we do as South Africans to make really time for the people to stand up and take charge and take responsibility for our own beliefs, our own culture, our own country? Is that part of the green shoots that we see coming out of all of this that we should be optimistic about?
Quite definitely, Howard. we see those green shoots happening. We saw the 7 provinces say no to looting. And that said to us, poverty is not only in KZN and Gauteng. Poverty is all over. But they condemned what was happening. And other than that, we went back and said, we will defend that which is ours. Because remember, when people destroyed the infrastructure, they needed the same infrastructure a few days later. They needed to travel distances. When the malls were nearer, now they needed to travel distances, long queues for a single loaf of bread. Now, I think South Africa are, as I said in the beginning, are a strange nation that holds itself together, even against all odds, to create a sense of balance, a sense of hope. And I think we are in that realm. To regain ourselves, to regain our own humanity, and it's for our own pride to be able to defend our constitution, the rule of law, and also to create stability in the country, which everybody needs. And nobody wants the war. Nobody wants the terrorism that we're likely to face. And we are very proud to be what we are.
So, Ray, in your final words, is this actually a time for hope? Because as the professor said, we maintain the rule of law. We actually have a criminal ex-president behind bars. He went to jail. That's an enormously positive sign for South Africa and for the rule of law. We had people standing up outside their malls and taking responsibility. That's an enormously positive sign. We didn't have massacres on the streets. Is this actually a good news story?
I think you always have to look at the positive, Howard. I think the Prince mentioned, and I think Gigi as well. I can't remember, but that South Africa is a miracle nation, and we always somehow get through things. And there were unfortunately not good things that happened 2 weeks ago, but the positivity is as you rightly say, there, and we have to be hopeful. I think we have to get on with it. We have to rebuild, and everyone has a role to play in ensuring that we go forward. And I think this might have been a shake to those who are in control of the state to say that we can't keep doing the same things over and over again. We can't, every time there's issues, increase the amount of people who are getting grants from 17 million people to 18 the following year and 19. We actually have to come back to the root causes of the inequality problem and deal with it effectively. And the only way to do that is through an economic revival that allows people who have the capital to invest in this economy, to invest in it, so that we can create jobs and ensure that more people are actively involved in the economy and we grow our taxpayer base. It's as simple as that.
So before I give the final word to His Royal Highness Prince Mangosuthu Budalesi to leave us with a blessing, because I think we need a blessing for the people of South Africa. Before we do that, I would just want to thank a few people. Number one, when we said, who should we have on this panel? And I called up Susan Abro, and Susan Abro said, speak to Ray. And Dina Diamond said, speak to Ray. And Mark Labner said, speak to Ray. They were all clearly 100% right. Gigi, this is the second time you've been on the panel with us. Just a huge thank you for everything. Professor, you've stepped in at the last moment with such wonderful words of wisdom and such insight for all of us. I just want to thank all of you for being on our panel this evening. And I want to ask those people watching, and we're still being watched by thousands of people on YouTube and Zoom and Facebook tonight. I want you, as we ask Prince Buthelezi, to leave us with a blessing for the people of South Africa. I would like you just to comment your hopes, your dreams, your wishes for South Africa in the chat section, and we will share all of those wishes with all of our panelists and with all of the people who are participating here this evening. So the final word tonight goes to His Royal Highness Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi. Bless us and bless the people of South Africa. Let's unmute you. I think you just muted there.
Hello.
Hi, now you're with us.
Can you hear me?
Absolutely. The final words go to you, Prince.
No. I wanted just to share with the panelists and yourself a joke about the Alcocks. When I was the best man at their wedding, you won't believe it, that marriage was discussed in Parliament. It's recorded on Hansard, because the minister said that Mr. Alcock, when he started Kupugani, he said that he had a prominent Bantu as the best man in his wedding. You know, we black people have been called natives, plurals, Bantu. So at that time, we were called Bantu. So Miss Alcock and Miss Alcock had a prominent Bantu reference to me as the best man at their wedding. So I've always believed, actually, even at the height of apartheid, I've always said, what a great country. You know, I was actually chided by a fellow black in America for saying that white South Africans have become indigents, just like white Americans are indigents now in America. He said I didn't know the meaning of the word, you know, because I believe that we all belong in this country, and together, I think God put us together because he had a plan for us to be together, because we need each other. We can't do without each other. And each one of us has so much to contribute to the common good of all of us. So I believe that we're a great nation, in spite of the fact that we are in these dire straits. I believe that since God is still on the throne, that we will somehow be able to get to rise again from the ashes.
May we rise again soon. To our remarkable panelists, to all the amazing people who've joined us this evening, to all the people who are busy putting their comments onto Zoom, Facebook, and YouTube, just a massive thank you for joining us this evening. We'll see you again on Thursday evening, where we have the three optimists. We've got Adrian Gore, we've got Mike Abel, and we've got Robbie Brosen, who will be looking for all the positivity that has come out of the last few weeks. So we'll see you again 8 p.m. on Thursday evening. Thank you so much for joining us. And Prince Buthelezi, on your birthday next month, as you turn 93, let us all celebrate some cake together, maybe on Zoom, if not in person. And may you have another 93 years after that as well.
And apparently you have discussed this with God. Thanks for that. Apparently you talk to God. I don't know whether I'm still alive on that.
You know, Prince, we talk to God. The trouble is he very seldom listens, and only sometimes he agrees. Good night, everyone. Britt will put up the pictures for Thursday night. But thank you all so much for joining us this evening.
God bless.
Thank you.
God bless you all. Ciao.
Yeah.
Good night.
Good night.